There is a crisis in Canada. It is silent, it is wide, and it is deep.
We're definitely in a crisis state, and I know that's, there's hyperbole, words like that get thrown around all the time. But it's a crisis in the sense that it's urgent. We're at a point in time where losses are accelerating and where we believe we're approaching, if not beyond, something that's called a tipping point, where we'll see massive changes in how ecosystems are structured. And with that, we expect even greater levels of biodiversity loss and more challenges with recovery. So we're in an urgent period. This is the time to halt the decline, stop the further loss of biodiversity, and then start to rebuild.
Humans rely on natural ecosystems, from the fungal underground networks along the tree roots to animals that walk under the canopy. Each organism works with their neighbors to form unique and balanced ecosystems. Each organism has a purpose.
The importance of biodiversity really can't be understated. Biodiversity is essentially our life support system here on Earth. Without a biodiverse environment, life on Earth as we know it wouldn't exist. We depend so heavily on biodiverse ecosystems, microorganisms, and the different relationships between organisms to create not only the food that we eat, but even the air that we breathe.
The loss of each species really can weaken a nation's capacity for a strong economy, flourishing human health, national security, and resistance to natural disasters. Each of these is built on those ecosystem services that species and habitats provide. So some plant and animal species can offer the potential for life-saving medicines. I think an interesting example, one of many, is the chemical compounds that are found in the venom of the imperiled and protected Gila monster lizard of the American Southwest inspired scientists to create the diabetes and weight loss drugs like Ozempic. So there's a lot of things that are interconnected here. And these ecosystem services, for example, provided by Canada's boreal forests, equate to over half of the value of the country's GDP.
Habitat loss is the #1 contributor to biodiversity decline in Canada. Clear-cut logging is one of the largest causes of habitat loss. Logging in British Columbia has doubled in rate since the 1970s. It isn't just old-growth rainforests and boreal forests that are suffering. Across Canada, only a quarter of original grassland habitats remain. In Ontario, you can find 3% of what used to be grasslands, including tallgrass prairie and black oak savannas. Over 97% have been lost in the past 200 years.
Grassland birds have been in decline to the point where they have declined by 60 or 70% on average across all of the species in Canada over the last 50 years. Many of our grassland birds are down at a few percent of their population sizes that they had in 1970, 50 years ago. So in the span of a single human lifetime, those species populations have declined by more than 90%. And declines in grassland bird populations are largely driven by agricultural practices and the loss of grasslands to agriculture. Grasslands make fantastic places to grow crops, and so there's an inherent conflict between humanity's use of those landscapes to grow food and the birds that used to rely on them.
Canada is experiencing more frequent and severe impacts of climate change. Longer hot seasons and lower precipitation is leading to wildfires that destroy habitats. Localized warming and cooling, shifts in seasonality, and sea level rise all pose emerging threats to biodiversity.
At a global level, climate change is a huge threat to kelp. We see the warming waters, particularly, most closely in British Columbia, in Howe Sound in the Strait of Georgia. Those warming waters stress kelp in its environment, and there is a thermal tolerance that kelp has of around 19 or 20 degrees centigrade. And above that, the reproduction and kind of the overall health of the kelp is greatly reduced. So globally, we have lost about half of the kelp forests around the world, and we continue to see declines of between 1% and 2% per year.
In the face of climate threats, organisms may need to adjust their distribution, behavior, and timing of activities to better meet their survival needs. Canadian species are experiencing especially intense changes, with studies showing that they must adapt to changing climate more quickly than the global average.
Shifting ranges, that's something we talk about a lot too. So, with thermal tolerance, species might shift northwards. And then just mismatches between things, right? So if things happen at different times, leaf out or migration or, whatever changes, everything's connected, right? So if timing of one species changes, that can have cascading effects on a whole bunch of different species. We have predictive models and we can try and predict, how species are going to shift northwards, for example. But because everything is interconnected and because it's so complicated, we don't actually have a solid handle on what's going to happen.
Invasive animal species can cause extinctions of local species through competition, predation, and habitat alteration. Their impact on native ecosystems, habitats, and species is severe and often irreversible.
A lot of the invasive plants that have come in and displaced native flowering plants, it may not be that they don't provide flowers and food and forage for species there, but it may be that they just do it at a different time of the year. We see a disconnect between when the pollinators are out and looking for food and when that food is actually available. It's not just the buzzing of the bees that's missing at the end of the day. It's the decline of other native flowers in other regions that depended on them, the native local honey they produce, the crops they pollinate, the jobs and ecosystems that rely on those, and more.
Logging, overfishing, mining, and hunting each contribute to the steep decline of species numbers.
Overharvesting impacts biodiversity loss by simply taking it out of the picture. We have historically, for a number of species, harvested beyond the point at which the fish can recruit new members into the population, and that just ensures that stock is going to be gone. It impacts biodiversity loss in that there are so many species that interact with one another in the food web, and not just in the ocean itself, but also outside of it. So seabirds, particularly eagles and other raptors, bears, wolves, they all feed on the salmon. So when they are depleted, so are the other stocks.
Overharvesting one resource can have a cascading effect on our environment. A great example of this is during the fur trade. We had a heavy overharvesting of sea otters on our coast, for example. They actually were extirpated or extinct in our area. And then sea otters eat urchins. Urchins munch the bottom of the kelp. So when sea otters were removed, urchin numbers abounded, and then the kelp forest were essentially lost because the bottom of it was mown by the urchins and they washed away. With that, then everything that lived in that forest, and kelp forests are similar to forests on land. They provide habitat, food, sanctuary for lots of different animals. Once they were gone, then all of those species went with it. So I think we often just don't understand how one small change can have massive ripple effects on the environment.
Microplastics, fishing gear, agricultural chemicals, noise and light pollution, and oil spills are just some of the pollutants that Canadian wildlife must contend with. No industry or individual is exempt, with many forms of pollution increasing. Agricultural runoff is contributing to algal blooms in large bodies of water like Lake Erie. These blooms will eventually result in dead zones that can no longer sustain life due to low oxygen content. Mercury and cadmium are found in orcas off the coasts of Canada. These persistent organic pollutants change their endocrine and immune systems, weakening entire populations.
A lot of forever chemicals are being stored in the brains and fatty tissues. Some of these are capable of passing through the placental barrier and actually affecting the newborn or the not yet born. And that can interfere with their neural development and so their ability to feed and echolocate and mate and reproduce, obviously. It's a huge concern for the larger marine mammals. The major source of pollution on this coast at the moment are the salmon farms, and they have been depositing drugs, chemicals, and disease agents, as well as parasites, into fish-bearing waters for about 30 years now. And in those same 30 years, the salmon species that were commercially important on this coast and have been closely tracked in terms of population numbers have declined extremely steeply and extremely quickly.
While the challenges to biodiversity are significant, there's good reason for hope. Solutions are at hand. It's simply a matter of deploying them.
So, what can people do? First of all, you can support the agencies and the people working in your community to improve the natural world around you. Collective action is powerful action, absolutely. On an individual level, you can reduce your food waste, because agriculture has such a large effect on the natural world, and food waste is, well, it's wasteful, but also if we can reduce food waste, then the effects of agriculture are reduced.
I think we're at a really critical moment in that we have seen a significant decline in biodiversity, but we have such amazing technology at the moment, a huge wealth of knowledge that we didn't have in the past that enables us to act now. And also from OceanWise's perspective, we've seen a recent swell in public support for the environment and programs addressing biodiversity. So I think we've got both the technical side and the public will to make it happen.
The restoration and protection of kelp forests is one of the best nature-based solutions that we can invest in. Kelp forests play a pivotal role in absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere, some of which is exported and buried deep in the ocean, effectively removing that carbon dioxide for long periods of time from the atmosphere. Also, the seaweed industry in Canada and around the world is growing quickly. There's a lot of potential in the industry to provide sustainable food sources for our growing population. One of the wonderful things about kelp is that it requires no land, no fresh water, no fertilizer. It really does have the potential to be a very sustainable source of food for people. So I would encourage you to go to your local grocery store or farmer's market and try and find some kelp and purchase some kelp and vote with your dollar.
The status quo, where we've gotten ourselves to, can't be what we aspire. It can't simply be to just keep what we've got. We need to start rebuilding, and that means restoration, allowing populations to rebound. It's going to take some creativity, and it's going to take the work of many, many people, in fact, every human on the planet.